All right, thank you for listening to our show, Dental Formulator's Playbook. Before we begin, wanted to share that our analytics show that we have good viewership. It's strong and it's ever increasing. But as a general reminder, wanted to let you know, remember to follow us or subscribe to us as your input and all the comments that we get and all this stuff, it helps shape the content we share and helps motivate us to continue to produce these shows. All right, now moving into the episode. Today, we are going to talk about certain aspects of fruits and vegetables. It'll be a narrowly focused, but it's going to start talking about this. And I wanted to revisit this because I previously wrote about this back in 2018. I published a book, Demon Reman in Preventive Dentistry. And I wanted to draw on some of those aspects of those fruits and vegetables because I think that that's going to help shape the discussion, not only in today's episode, but as we move forward, because we have to better understand the nature of acids, whether the acids
Right.
are being put into a formulation for
Hmm.
flavoring purposes, or whether we just want to better understand the foods that we're eating so that we can
Yes.
address that with the oral products that we end up using. And this is a topic that really isn't addressed at this level. And so it's a great opportunity for us to talk about it now. So that's what we're going to do.
So let's start with, are acidic foods and drinks equally damaging?
No, they are not. That's the short answer.
Okay, so for example, you're saying that apples and oranges have different tooth damaging profiles. Why is that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's because there are different, quote unquote, I'm going to consider here dominant acids that are
Okay.
found in either the orange or the apple.
Okay, so the dominant acids are different, you're saying. So what are these dominant acids and how are they different or distinct?
Well, okay, so let's talk about the understanding that we are talking about weak acids, weak organic acids in these fruits. In other words, we're not talking about nitric acid, sulfuric acid, or even hydrochloric acid. Obviously,
Okay.
those are way stronger and stuff. Fruits
Yes.
don't have that. So we're only talking about these weak organic acids.
Okay.
These are what they're called. So we need to say that for apples, the dominant acid is malic acid.
Okay.
For oranges, the dominant acid is citric acid.
Okay.
Okay. Now, sometimes oranges can have a little bit of extra character of acid. They might have some malic acid content, maybe even some ascorbic acid, also known as vitamin C. But apples don't really have either of those in any appreciable abundance. It's usually just malic acid.
Okay, so well, I understand that they taste completely different, but I didn't know apples have one type of dominant acid, like you just said, malic
Right.
acid, while oranges, have a different one, citric acid.
Yeah, it's like actually comparing apples to oranges.
Okay, so now I know why you chose apples and oranges.
That's right.
Okay, literally, right? So, which presents greater teeth to the risk or greater risk to the teeth and why?
Yeah, that's right. So we talked previously about dental erosion. Remember, dental erosion is the absence of any microbes. You're just getting the acid acting directly on the tooth structure. Whereas microbes, and that would be, again, dental erosion. For caries, you need the microbes. Microbes, well, we don't necessarily need them. Nobody wants caries, but caries are necessarily, connected intimately to microbes. Microbes produce acids from either the sugars or the other fermentable carbohydrates like
Right.
starches,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that are typically found in, for instance, bread, maybe even some crackers, things
Mm-hmm.
like this. And so either of those, wherever the source is coming into, whether it's, from the microbes or just from regular dietary acids or even, systemic acids that are brought up, like bile acids, unfortunately, if that's like a situation, the whole point is both of these acids we're going to look at today, malic acid, citric acid, and we're going to be talking about, the fruit pH and those two acids.
Okay, it sounds good.
So, first of all, both of them are considered to be carboxylic acids. Okay, it's just the nature of it. Carboxylic acids are really important. And again, it's the structure of these. It's like one carbon, two oxygens, and a hydrogen. That is the definition, really, of a carboxylic group.
Okay.
These are so important for not only a reaction from a chemistry perspective to produce other things, but from a taste perspective too. And also, it helps to differentiate then among some of these different small organic acids. So, malic acid
Okay.
only has two sets of these carboxylates. Sometimes it's called dicarboxylic acid, whereas citric acid has three. So that would be considered a tricarboxylic acid. So those are the reactive sites that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so citric acid, I would think, has stronger clawing or chelating action than malic acid, is what
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
sounding like.
Yep, exactly right. And so
Okay,
that's the first point and the strongest point of differentiation. In fact, if we were to take a closer look at it and say, well, what is the actual binding of those carboxylic acid groups
okay,
to calcium, we can start to put like some quantifiable numbers to it.
okay,
So then we're not talking just generally qualitatively. Qualitatively, they are different. One has two, one has three, and they obviously taste different. But let's talk about what that interaction is with calcium whenever those acids are in the presence of that. So,
okay. So if I heard correctly,
yep,
citric acid has three carboxylic acid,
yeah,
and while malic acid has only two. So is
yep.
that the reason for some of these differences?
Yeah, that's going to be. So let's take a look next. Okay, so now we have the carboxylic acid
Mhm.
groups. One has three, one has two,
Right.
right? Now we need to take a look at the pH. Now, the pH of oranges are generally about 3.7. Now, there's going to be some that are going to be more acidic, meaning it'll have pH maybe 3.5, 3.4, 3.2. This pales in comparison to a lime, which has a really low pH. It's even less than 2, or right around 2, even though that also has citric acid. But
Hmm.
we're talking about oranges here. And so the orange, the pH is going to be about 3.7. Now, if we talk about the pH of an apple, again, there's so many different varieties of apples, just
Right.
like there are for the oranges. But let's give that a range, maybe 3.3 to maybe 3.8. Okay.
Okay.
For purposes of this discussion, we're going to assume that the pH is fixed right around 3.7. If you wanted to say 3.6, that's fine, but this will play a role as
In
we go
general,
forward.
yes.
Yep, that's right. Now, at this pH, okay, at this pH, there's going to be calcium binding that will occur with the carboxylic acid that we're talking about, whether it's citric acid or malic acid.
Okay.
And again, there's going to be how many types of, I should say, how many types of citric acid entities? I'm kind of like spoiling it a little bit here. How many are there going to be for the citric acid, which is a tricarboxylic acid?
Try three.
Three. And how many will there be for malic acid?
You said it was die,
It's
so two.
dicarboxylic. That's right. So there's
All right,
two.
I'm following then.
So at this pH of 3.7, there's going to be, let's just choose one citrate and one malate. Those
Okay.
are the corresponding anions that exist in the fruit at that pH. The binding of each of those malate or citrate to calcium is going to be one, a value of one for citrate,
Okay.
and 0.84 for malate.
Okay. So slight
Yeah, it's just
difference.
a slight difference.
Yeah. In
Yep.
the calcium binding constant between then the citric and malic acids.
Yeah.
When specifically the pHs are
Yeah, so
similar.
we're just going to take, just the pH of the fruit itself. It's going to be about 3.7,
Okay.
so just sitting in the fruit itself, you
Okay.
have, what would be the binding to calcium at that pH for the orange? It would be a value of 1.
One. Okay.
And for the apple, also at the pH of 3.7, the
Point eight
binding would
four.
be 0.84.
Okay.
That's
So
right.
I'm understanding.
Yep, so that's the first
Okay.
part. So I know it's a little technical, but I think that this will help.
Helps.
But we're not dealing with just those pHs, are we? Because we end up eating these
Oh,
apples and these
right.
oranges. So now we have to talk about the pH of the mouth. And
Okay.
the pH of the mouth will influence whether any of these other citrate or malate anions will also exist.
Okay. Okay. So, right. So the typical pH of the mouth is around 7,
Yeah.
which would be considered neutral,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Now,
Okay.
again, the pH of the mouth, if you have a disease condition where you have rampant caries, active caries, the pH will be lower than 7.
Okay.
Also, if you have periodontal issues, it might actually be higher. So, in
Okay.
those disease states, your pH can drift. Now, also based on your diet, based on your just genetics, maybe some of your
Mm-hmm.
oral hygiene regimen, like for
Mm-hmm.
instance, if you're using a lot more baking soda
Yes,
in
which
your
we talked
toothpaste,
about.
your pH might be higher. But
Okay.
some people, depending on their diet, especially if they like a little bit more carbs, or if they're just physiologically just built that way, their genes are dictating it, their pH might be a little less than 7. So some variety of that is normal. So we can, so what we don't want to do is we don't want to, scare anybody and say, hey, look, if your pH is 6.8, you're in trouble. No, that's not true. And I think the physiological pH of the mouth on average is about 7.4 or so, actually. It
Okay.
ranges, but again, it depends on if you're well hydrated, depends on your diet, your
Lots of
overall
things.
health, your genes, all of these
But
things.
7 is neutral and 7 is kind of where most people sit. So we'll just stay there.
Yep, we'll stay there. We're going to
Okay.
assume that there's no rampant disease that's going on in the mouth that's like, having an additional factor. Okay.
Okay. So you're saying if the apple or orange is introduced into the mouth, then
Yes.
we're going to have to consider not only the pH of the apple or the orange, but once it hits our mouth, which is 7, it's going to change then, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So in addition to those other forms of citrate and malate,
Okay.
we'll call them citrate 1 and malate 1. All of a sudden, we're going to have additional citrate and malate acid forms that are going to be present because the pH of the mouth is 7. And
Okay.
we're just going to say, like for citric acid, if the pH is above 4.76, all of a sudden a second form of citrate comes into play. So in addition to citrate 1 that we'd already just talked about, now we have citrate 2. And that has a binding constant that is a bit higher. And again, we're talking about the
Okay.
calcium. What is its affinity to attach to calcium on your tooth? So, or just free calcium that's even just present in your saliva. So you had citrate 1, now we have citrate 2. Again, with malic acid, there's all that also with the pH of about 7 is also going to introduce the second form of the malate. So we'll also call that malate 2. So we
Okay.
have two forms of malate, we have two forms of citrate that would exist at the physiological pH, okay,
Okay.
in the mouth.
Okay, so
Awesome.
just to be clear, so we
Yep.
talked previously, there's 3 forms of citric acid,
Yep.
and you just talked about 1 and 2,
Yep.
and then 2 forms of the malic acid, and you
Yep.
talked about that kind of 1 and 2, just to kind of, okay,
Yep.
cool. I'm following.
Yeah, no, so this is good, and I again not trying not to get too technical here, but if you're listening to this, helping to get this visualization, if you're able
It's very helpful.
to see this, if you're watching it, then maybe there's some additional, insight that's going to be given up on the screen. But the whole point is, we have now not just it's not just one form of citrate, you have two, and you also have two forms of malate. Um, Possibly you have the third and final form of citrate as well. But before we get to that, because we're going to get to that, what would be the binding constant? So we talked about 1 being the binding constant for citrate 1 and
Right.
calcium. For malate, it's 0.84.
Yeah, for malate
Okay.
1, yes.
Now, if we're talking about citrate 2, the second form, that binding constant increases. It jumps from 1 to 2.79.
That's a big jump.
Okay, it's a big jump. And also for malate 2, it goes from 0.84 to 2.55. So
Okay.
the separation starts to get a little bit bigger, but somebody might say, come on, 2.79
Right.
versus 2.55, that's not really that big of a difference.
No.
What does that really mean? It actually means something. And that small difference leads to a big difference in how the binding with calcium and each of
I
these
wouldn't have thought.
acids is done. So what's really interesting is that there was a study that was talked about in 2008, for instance. This is probably one of the better ones, where they looked at a 1-to-1 ratio of a calcium chloride solution at the same concentration as like the acid solution that they use, and they use different acid solutions, including citric acid. They also use malic acid. They used a couple other small organic acids. The pH drop that ensued whenever citric acid was combined with calcium chloride, again, keeping all the concentrations the same,
Hmm.
everything's 1-to-1, right? Was about 1.28. Now, with malic acid, the drop was 0.2. I
Wow.
think that's like a 6.4 difference, right?
Yeah,
As
that's
as it has a
crazy.
greater drop, I think, if my math is right. But the whole point is there's a big difference that can be produced even with the binding being maybe not so very different between the malate 2 and the malate 1.
Okay.
But we have to remember that it wasn't just the malate 2 and the citrate 2, it's also the citrate 2 with the citrate 1 and the malate 2 and the malate 1. And if you even go higher, so like the pH in that system was about 5.6, right? If
Okay.
you go even higher above a pH of 6.76,
Okay.
approximately. You have the third and final form of the citrate that's also there. And that level is even way higher. So instead of the binding constant with calcium being 2.79, it jumps all the way up to over 4.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so all of a sudden you have now three different versions of the citrate, whereas you only have the two
The two
versions
for malic.
of malate and or of malic acid, and those two versions were already they had a lower affinity to calcium than citric acid did.
And so now that third one that is
That
present
third
because of
one
the
could
higher
also be present.
pH,
That could also play a role
then
whenever.
it increases the calcium binding.
Yeah, that's right. And that might influence whenever somebody eats, or chews, an orange,
Okay, well,
right?
that really speaks to the power of any given acid right there, whether it's citric or malic,
Yeah,
either
absolutely.
way.
Yeah.
So we're talking about calcium binding. So
Yeah,
I
that's right.
need to know. We always talk about EDTA and its claw on calcium grabbing stuff. So what is the calcium binding of EDTA?
Well, just for a perspective, it's about 11.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, again, remember we had talked about this. EDTA is sometimes used to get rid of unwanted iron, maybe
Okay.
zinc. Not only systemically in somebody's body, but if you
Right.
wanted to clean your sink or something, even if you had scale and you didn't have a softener and you had a lot of calcium that was just part of the buildup, sometimes cleaners that have EDTA are going to be very effective in trying to attach to the calcium to be able to strip that away from your sink or from the pipes or whatever
Okay.
you're talking about if there's flushing like that.
Good.
So, and but yeah, the EDTA is strong. I mean, that's 2.3 times greater than the citrate, 2, which, or actually, or citrate 3, actually, which had about 4.7
Hmm.
constant value,
Good grief.
and yeah,
Yeah,
it's just,
so
it's incredible, right?
no wonder it makes more sense to me now how we have talked about how EDTA can have a big impact in that chelating that strength. So that's clearly why it has such a strong impact and why we kind of talk about it. I'm looking at you, Live Fresh.
Yeah, that's right. So exactly, the higher binding count, the higher calcium binding constant means there are going to be increased risk for mineral loss. And this is why an EDTA is typically used as maybe some of the prepping during surgical intervention by the dentist, whether they have to prepare a canal for, well, intervent like a root
Right,
canal or something
right.
like that, or if they need to remove a smear layer, sometimes that is done too. But it's very effective and a little goes a long
Clearly.
way. A little goes a long way just because of how potent it is and how much it wants to add,
Absolutely.
attack and hold on to these metal cations like calcium or iron or zinc, things like this.
And that's why you've talked about in the past why when there is EDTA, that it's really, really important to mitigate some of that chelating action
That's right.
by including fluoride
Yeah.
in your formula. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, that sheds more light for me.
Yeah, and I hope that it becomes even clearer, right? So if anybody's going to be using a daily use product that's going to have EDTA in it, that product should have fluoride in it. I mean,
I understand now
you know,
why.
that would be one of the best reasons to do that. Now, if you're talking about foods and drinks, things like this, there's another way to kind of mitigate the effect that the acid can have on
Okay.
the teeth that can maybe lead to reduced risks for tooth erosion
Okay.
or mineral loss, right, from the tooth. And it's really easy. You just have calcium added to that particular product.
Is that why they sometimes add it to orange juice or
That could be one of the reasons why it is added. I'm sure it's not the only reason. They're going to say, "Hey, vitamin D and calcium
nutrition?
are going to be great for bone
Okay.
development and
But I'm
all
glad
that
it helps
stuff."
our teeth.
Yes, but orange juice that has calcium in it will have less of a impact on tooth erosion, right? And
Very
it'll be
interesting.
less damaging, in short.
That is fascinating. So if you're gonna buy orange juice, make sure you buy the stuff with added calcium.
Yeah,
It'll help your teeth.
another way to think about it is the calcium that would be found in orange juice, for instance, or in your supplements. It acts as a sacrificial calcium, right?
Makes complete sense.
That absorbs some of that acids from the food stuff or drink or whatever it is, so that your teeth are going to be, more likely to survive that challenge.
Absolutely makes sense. Okay, so then what other factors influence the potential damage, like of a given food app? item, whether it's apples, oranges, whatever.
Right. So, so the acid part is definitely key, and I think it's probably clear now. Hopefully, even if it's
Yeah.
long-winded or whatever, trying to understand this. But citrate is different than malate, right? And both of
Yes.
those are different than EDTA, right?
Yes.
Although EDTA isn't a small organic acid, it's presented there as like a buffering type of ingredient or
But still,
chelating
some people
ingredient.
use it in their daily product.
Exactly, and we do know that, and it's also a decent preservative too. So even if they're not using it per se to help remove plaque, right? Or to maybe get rid of unwanted discolorations in the enamel,
Right?
that could also be a reason. Sometimes it's used as a preservative,
Okay.
and to good effect, really. But EDTA does thin out formulations. We won't talk about that too much now, but there are others that can be used in its stead,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the other factor then, in addition to the acid type or the chelating type of entity that is found in fruits or dental products or whatever, the other part is naturally pH, right?
Okay.
Just the pH of the product and or of the food item. We know that tooth mineral begins to dissolve at what pH?
5.5.
5.5. And so the very first thing we have to take a look at is, well, what is the pH? So we talked about the apple and the orange, and we said, hey, look, there's many different types. We'll just have the pH of the fruit at around 3.7, right? So
Yes.
that pH is already going to be damaging for tooth mineral loss,
Yes.
right? And now, so that's obviously the top level. The next level then is, well, what are the acids that are present?
Okay.
And
Right.
then that's where the citric versus malic acid starts to come into play.
Okay.
So I think that that's really important. And as we mentioned, what was the pH drop then? Whenever citric acid was combined with calcium chloride back,
1.28.
yeah, so
Right.
yeah, back in that 2008 study, it was a 1.28 drop compared to malic acid, which had only zero point 0.2. So it was a really, clear difference
Okay.
between those two acids. So again, the acids matter and pH matters. So those two are like, they go hand in hand. It's like salt and pepper, man. If you're going to use that as your spice, of course, we wouldn't. We would use other spices that other
Anyway.
people would do for
So,
the thing.
so in that 2008 study, malate didn't really create a large
Nope,
pH drop.
that's right.
So this data really supports that malate doesn't appear to be as damaging as citrate
Hey,
then.
apple a day keeps the doctor away, right? I mean,
There you go.
it's
Okay. So in other words, oranges are more likely to be damaging to the teeth than apples.
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And there's going to be very little argument there. There's a number of dental studies that have done this. In fact, the whole field of dental erosion research has really built itself on using citric acid as the default acid to be able to test the efficacy of certain products, whether those contain stannous fluoride, for instance, to help prevent dental erosion.
Makes sense.
And
Because
there's
that's the most common.
because it's most common, it's the most damaging too. You're going to
Okay.
have,
That makes sense.
in a lot of your candies and stuff, you're going to have combinations of these. So like we like nerds, of
Oh
course. Who
yeah.
doesn't like nerds, right? I mean, there's going to be different candies that will have different flavor profiles, and usually that profile is built on, yeah, sugar is always going to be a part of it and the type of sugar, but it's always going to be either citric acid, malic acid, or tartaric acid.
Okay.
And having those different acids present in a given candy, for instance, will elicit different responses depending on how your taste buds are progressing the metabolism of those,
Very involved.
of those acids. I think Swedish fish, I think they even use like tartaric acid with citric acid, The
Okay.
nerds likes to use citric acid predominantly. There's other, treats. We don't have all those right here, but not only that with respect to like candies and stuff, but also in dental products. We've also seen, and we even use citric acid in some of our formulations
Right.
just because it's a great,
Or amounts usually.
exactly, smaller amounts. It's a great buffering agent,
Mm-hmm.
number one. Number two, it can act also as a type of preservative. And then
Mm-hmm.
number three, it can help elicit the boost of other flavors depending on
Absolutely.
how, that product is formulated and what you're trying
That
to
was probably the most
evoke.
surprising for me when
Exactly.
we started working. I started working with you with the citric acid.
Yeah, that's right. So the citric acid has a different taste profile than malic acid. So, like in a dental formulation, you often see citric acid maybe with peppermint oil.
Okay.
That's a great combination. You won't likely see malic acid with peppermint oil. It
Our taste
just,
might not really
yeah,
like that.
exactly. Our
Okay.
taste buds just do not like that kind of combination. So, anyway, so going back to it, and obviously the level of these acids is going to be very low in these products, but if products have these types of acids, then they should probably also have maybe fluoride in there or some other agent, maybe that's calcium containing, in order to
Mm-hmm.
help mitigate any kind of potential problem before it's introduced into the mouth.
That
Okay.
makes complete sense.
So obviously this doesn't, this extends to not only the foods we eat, but also considerations that we have as we formulate
It
products
makes sense.
or what is in the formulations that we're using. So apples have malic acid. Sometimes malic acid is called the apple acid. That has also been
Okay.
considered that. So obviously citrus fruits have what?
Citric acid, right?
Yeah, I mean, so that's not, yeah,
Doing good
yeah.
today.
So that's not too hard. Now, I just mentioned another one, tartaric acid. So this
Yes.
is the one that we need to talk a little bit about because this is interesting. Where would tartaric acid be found? Grapes.
Okay.
And does grape juice taste different than apple
Oh
juice
my gosh, yes.
than orange juice?
Absolutely.
Yeah, everything is different. Even the grape will taste differently than the apple and the orange, although sometimes it's hard, again, just because of the nature of the different sugars involved. We will talk about that in another episode because there are different sugars
Right.
that are dominant, if we will,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the given foodstuff or drink, but also in these fruits. So you have
Right.
tartaric acid in grapes, you have malic acid in apples, and you have citric acid in
Okay.
oranges, right?
Makes sense.
Now, speaking of grapes, an
Yes.
interesting byproduct that happens to occur during the course of winemaking is the precipitation. And I'm not talking about any kind of sediments that maybe have like the grape skins or
Mm.
seeds, things like that. But during the process of this, especially if it's stored under cool conditions, tartaric acid can actually crystallize out. Sometimes this is going to be referred to as the dregs or the lees. It's part of that. That would be in the bottle, in the bottom of your flask or your,
Okay.
bottle, cask, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever vessel of wine that had been stored in a cool
Hmm.
condition for a while. So what's interesting is that those are crystalline tartrates, and those have a very useful purpose. I mean, it's there, they're completely harmful, but they can be
Harmful.
used, or they're not harmful. They're saved, they're not harmful, but they can be used for additional purposes, including
Okay.
baking, cleaning, and here's where it could be, potentially harmful, but not for us, is an ant repellent. So it can actually help keep some of the
What are
some of
we
the
talking
ants away.
about?
We're talking about cream of tartar.
No way. That is you know what? Every now and then I had come across a recipe that calls for that. And for the life of me, I couldn't really figure out how you would get cream of tartar and why it's that name, but now it makes
Yeah,
sense.
so this is one way to do it.
Okay.
So these can be synthesized, no doubt about that.
Okay.
These can be synthesized directly, so you don't always have to get cream of tartar by virtue of winemaking. But during the course of winemaking, these were some of the earliest observations of finding these kinds of crystals, and somebody filtered them out, and then they
Okay.
put them as part of their, process. Hey, it was curiosity, right?
Wow.
As long as, you could find a use for it, maybe that there was a potential market there and
Well,
advantage for it.
yeah, use
So
all your byproducts and make the most out of it.
that's right. So tartaric acid, when it crystallizes, this can be a potent inhibitor of sugar crystallization. So to keep sugar from crystallizing, add some cream of tartar or this tartar, which is essentially
Right.
just this, solid tartaric acid. And why would you do that to prevent crystallization of sugar? Well, if you had, for instance, a caramel topping and it was sweet and you wanted to make sure that it had great flow characteristics, then you would add
Okay.
that there so you don't all of a sudden it's not hardened,
Okay.
if it's sitting on the countertop or if it gets into a cold
Uh,
environment or whatever be the case. So
okay.
that's
Well,
one example.
right. I've always understood them. They make fluffier based foods like the
Yep,
meringues or the souffles.
absolutely.
Okay. So speaking of the tartrates then, and going back to citrate and malate, what are the calcium binding components?
So tartaric acid is considered a dicarboxylic acid. So
Like
then
malate then.
like malate. So it'll
Okay.
have how many forms of the malate
Two.
anion? Two, right. So
All
we'll have a
right.
tartrate one, tartrate two. Now, at low pH, say around 3.4. So we're trying to stay around like the
Yep.
pH of like the orange and the apple. Let's just say you had a grape and the pH happened to be 3.4. It's probably not, but I just want to use that as
For
an example to
similarities,
keep
yeah.
that in there. What would be the binding constant? It's 0.92 with calcium. So for citric acid, for that
Okay.
citrate one, it was about 1.
Right.
For malate one, it was
So
0.84.
it's in the middle, kind
So
of.
it's in the middle. So it would be more similar to the
Citric.
citrate. So it's probably going to have more of a damaging profile, or more
Okay.
of a profile, if you will, of citrate than malate. And then if you were to increase the pH to above 5, all of a sudden the other second form of tartrate
Okay.
anion would also be created of that acid, and that is about 2.8. Okay.
Again, similar.
Really similar to the
Cit
citrate 2.
yeah.
And malate 2 is 2.55, so it's lower. So again, in total, tartaric acid is more similar to
Citric acid.
citric acid. Yeah. So this is another reason. So in these models that dental researchers use, and again, one of the reasons why we're talking about this is because if somebody were to have a formulation and they were going to say, look, this can help balance, the deleterious, impact of certain diets like foods or just,
Okay.
behaviors, imbibing a lot of wine. So somebody has like a mint or maybe a mouthwash or maybe a toothpaste, you know, they would want to do a laboratory study, at least initially, to get some kind of proof of efficacy to say, hey, look, my product can actually help balance out
Okay.
these kind of erosive
That makes a
challenges.
lot of sense.
And so you're going
Okay.
to find citric acid as being among, one of the major ingredients that is used in these dental testing models to say, hey, look, that is the ailment in this particular case. You can also use wine as well.
So it'd be like a good control.
Yeah, it would be a great control,
Okay.
so that would be an example. Now, clinically, this is like way obvious, in fact, there was a lot of research papers that have been published between 2000 and 2010. I mean, they still go on, but this is during the time where they're really trying to, establish dental erosion as a major 21st century kind of,
Mm-hmm.
problem just because of well, there's probably lots of reasons for that, but it's
Mm-hmm.
different than dental caries. And with all the sports drinks, with all the
Oh my
activities,
gosh,
even
yes.
chlorinated water can have a deleterious impact on swimmers' teeth. I mean, there's a whole bunch
Wow.
of different avenues to
Mm-hmm.
do it. And they want to do this because there's opportunities to do research and there's funding and
Mm-hmm.
and just general knowledge too, right? If somebody is
Absolutely.
active, so you see all the athletes taking a drink of Gatorade and then maybe sometimes they swish in their mouth and then they spit.
Yes.
That is an acidic formulation. Yes, it has citric acid. Yes, they're probably experiencing some demineralization of tooth structure. That will happen. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why this field has really emerged, I would say, pretty strongly within the last 20 years. And so even companies like Procter and Gamble will even say, hey, look, their stannous fluoride toothpaste is good against dental
The
erosion.
erosion.
So they're trying to find, this is how formulators, marketers, brands, are
Mm-hmm.
just trying to figure out how can we create a product and
Mm-hmm.
then address the need that is being unmet, but is definitely a need because, well, people have eroded teeth.
Right.
Anyway,
But we were talking about the tartaric acid, the
yeah, the
tartrates,
tartrates.
um, which are associated with the wine and whatnot.
Yep.
And if I understand correctly, wine's a big, big problem when it comes to dental erosion. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
absolutely. I mean, even Mandel, Mandel, researcher, pretty renowned researcher in like salivary type based research. He even published in 2005, I think. Again, this is just one study. There's many other studies out there. Anybody can look at this. We'll have the link there posted for just this particular study. But it was just a case study of a 56-year-old woman who was an avid wine drinker.
Loved her wine.
Yeah, and she had clinically detectable dental erosion. Her teeth were thinner and they had the
Wow.
characteristic rounded corners, at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
teeth, and they just didn't have that luster, right? They just didn't have that thickness that you would in a healthy mouth. And so, again, we're not saying that drinking wine is bad. Hey, but just as in everything, it depends on your physiology, it depends
Mm-hmm.
on what products you're using, it depends on your diet
And how you
and your habits,
manage it, right?
and it depends on
Really.
how you manage it. And some people might think that they're doing something great, and maybe they are. So, for instance, if some people are, participating in a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables,
Hmm.
well, guess what? They're going to be more at risk for dental erosion.
Absolutely. That makes
Maybe,
sense.
maybe they stay away from from sugar so that their caries risk is low, but they still have dental erosion. And
Okay.
this is why,
Right.
because these
That makes
acids
sense.
continue to do their damage. So you have the pH as the number one factor, and you also have the acids. Now, we understand there's other components in wine that can also
Yes.
attribute, this. Wine has multiple acids. It can have multiple different sugars.
Yes.
White is different than red, and these present different issues to the drinker, but we'll save that for another episode.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say wine. Maybe I could have a glass of wine while
Yeah.
we discuss
Yeah, but if you
it.
do have a glass of wine,
Uh-oh. Wait.
then
So,
how would you combat that?
okay,
So,
so this is a reminder. Any acidic drink, whether it's wine, orange juice,
yep,
whatever, sports drink,
yep.
don't immediately brush your teeth afterwards.
Again, don't do that because
Your enamel's weakened.
it's weaken, it's soften, and then the brushing action will help
Scrape it
wear
away.
away. Yeah, so you already have the chemical
Mm-mm.
destruction of the tooth.
Right.
If you introduce the toothbrush, now you're having a mechanical destruction too. You're having mechanical wear. So you don't want to do that. That's like a 2 for 1, and your teeth are
Right.
not going to go.
So, like I said before, it's all in how you manage that. So, one, don't brush your teeth immediately after doing that, but you
Right.
can also, after having that acidic experience, like eat something with calcium, like cheese or yogurt or something like
It's
that.
funny because at certain wine tasting events, and we've been at some of these, right? You'll have like, for instance, champagne, and then the sommelier or whoever
Yes,
is promoting their brand, they're going to say, well, you have your champagne, but if you have it with strawberries, it'll help produce this essence on
it
your taste buds.
does.
While that's really great, that's a strawberry, and strawberries have acid. I haven't talked
Oh
about
my
the acid
gosh.
profile of a strawberry,
Champagne, acidic,
but
strawberries.
you can see that. But then there's other ones where it's like, okay, here's a nice red. Okay,
Hmm.
you can have this red wine, but then have this type of cheese, whether it's a
Yeah,
Gouda cheese, brie cheese, whatever cheese, and all of a sudden,
that calcium from that.
yeah, the calcium for that can mitigate the damage from that, but can also bring out better the notes of the wine as
Yes,
well.
absolutely.
So there's a very clear science of this, and although it's all based on the taste buds per se,
Hmm.
there's also other things that could be considered, like, hey,
It makes
what am I
sense.
doing to my teeth while I'm
Yeah,
doing this? Especially again, if you're an avid wine drinker,
right.
this could be an issue.
Hey, just a quick reminder that if you don't have cheese or calcium, whatever around, try to have like a sugar-free mint or sugar-free gum because that will stimulate your saliva
Yep.
production. And your saliva is your own body's way of
That's right.
remineralizing teeth,
It
right?
naturally secretes the proteins, the
Okay.
carbonates,
So
the
those you can do it.
phosphates to help bring up that pH,
Perfect.
to a more physiologically acceptable protective, level. So, and we'll be
Awesome.
talking about that more for sure.
Okay.
All right, great. And that was a great comment. Okay, and so with that, that's going to be the end of this episode for this. We will talk more about this because this is going to influence maybe your decisions into what types of drinks. Like one of the things that we will be talking about in a more recent forthcoming episode here is going to be, for instance, how does Coca-Cola differ than Diet A&W root beer, for instance? Like,
So there is a difference.
is there a difference? I mean, obviously, compositionally, there's going to be a
Right.
difference, but what types of acids are present?
Okay.
And what maybe, and is the pH different too
Okay.
of those drinks? So those are going to be things that we'll be talking about. But anyway, for now, that ends this episode. We thank you for listening to Dental Formulator's Playbook. Stay curious and keep smiling.